$500, roared the auctioneer, his gavel poised above the wooden block as sweat beaded his forehead in the sweltering afternoon heat. Do I hear 6? Kieran Blackridge felt his world crumble as he watched Celeste Nightingale stand. Trembling on the auction platform, her wrists bound with rope, her sapphire dress torn and stained from 3 days of captivity. The woman he'd loved in secret for 2 years, the blacksmith's daughter who sang like an angel and smiled like sunrise, was being sold to the highest bidder to pay her father's gambling debts. 600, called out Mortimer Grimwald, the corrupt banker whose pale eyes devoured Celeste like she was already his property, and I'll throw in another 100 if she's intact. The crowd's laughter made Kieran's stomach turn to acid. His calloused hands clenched into fists as he calculated his meager savings. Barely $300 after a brutal winter that had killed half his cattle. Not nearly enough to compete with Grimwald's fortune. 700, shouted another voice to Tobias Ravencroft, the cruel mine owner, whose 3 previous wives had all died under mysterious circumstances. Celeste's emerald eyes swept desperately across the crowd until they found Kieran's face. The silent plea in her gaze hit him like a physical blow. She knew he was there. She was counting on him to save her. But what could a dirt-poor rancher do against men who counted their wealth in thousands? 800, Grimwald countered, his yellowed teeth gleaming in a predatory grin. 9. Ravencroft snapped back, clearly determined to add Celeste to his collection of broken women. Kieran's mind raced frantically. His ranch, his cattle, his late father's prized stallion Thunder. Everything he'd worked for, everything that defined his identity as a man, of it mattered compared to the woman standing in chains before a crowd of leering vultures. Going once at 900? The auctioneer's voice cut through Kieran's desperation. Time slowed to a crawl. Kieran saw Celeste's tears catching the harsh sunlight, saw Ravencroft's cruel smile of anticipated victory, saw his own future stretching out as an endless wasteland if he lost her now. Going twice. Wait. Kieran's voice cracked like thunder. Across the square, pushed through the crowd with desperate urgency, his worn boots slipping on the dusty cobblestones. I bid everything I own. The crowd turned to stare at the young rancher whose threadbare clothes and calloused hands marked him as working-class hardly, the type who could compete with Millbrook's elite. Everything you own, the auctioneer sneered. And what exactly would that be, boy? Kieran's jaw tightened at the dismissive tone, but his eyes never left Celeste's face. The Blackridge ranched 2,000 acres of prime grazing land. My herd of 50 head of cattle, my horses, including Thunder, the finest. Stallion in 3 counties. My cabin, my equipment, my savings. His voice grew stronger with each word. Every damn thing I possess in this world, I bid it all for her freedom. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Even accounting for the recent losses, Kieran's holdings were worth easily $1,200 more than either Grim or Ravencroft had offered. You can't be serious, Grimwald sputtered, his face flushing red with rage. That's not how auctions work. Actually, came a new voice from the edge of the crowd. It's exactly how they work when the bid is legitimate. Everyone turned to see Judge Thornfield approaching, his weathered face grave with authority. Young Blackridge has made a legal offer. Do you gentlemen wish to counter with equivalent value? Ravencroft's face twisted with fury, but even his wealth couldn't match the total value of a working ranch. This is preposterous. A woman should go to a man of substance, not some cowboy who will lose everything in a year. The substance of a man, Judge Thornfield replied coolly, is measured by what he's willing to sacrifice for others, not what he hoards for himself. On the platform, Celeste stared at Kieran with a mixture of love, gratitude, and horror. He was destroying his life to save hers, giving up everything he'd built to free her from a fate worse than death. Kieran, no, she whispered, her voice barely audible across the square. Don't do this for me. Not everything. Not your ranch. But Kieran had already stepped forward, pulling a folded deed from his jacket pocket. The document that proved his ownership of the Blackridge Ranch's birthright, his identity, his future, everything he'd ever been or hoped to become. I said everything, he repeated firmly, placing the deed on the auctioneer's table. I meant it. The auctioneer's hands trembled as he examined the deed, clearly torn between the legitimacy of Kieran's unprecedented bid and the dangerous fury radiating from Grimwald and Ravencroft. The crowd pressed closer, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for generations. "This is madness," Grimwald roared, spittle flying from his lips. "That ranch is mortgaged to my bank. Can't use collateral he doesn't fully own." "Actually," Judge Thornfield interjected, moving to examine the deed himself, "the final payment was made 6 months ago. The Black Ridge Ranch is owned free and clear." Stern gaze swept over the banker. "Perhaps you should check your records more carefully, Mortimer." Kieran felt a surge of pride despite his desperation. His father had died owing money to Grimwald's bank, but Kieran had worked himself nearly to death to clear that debt. Every dawn-to-dusk day, every missed meal, every sacrifice had been worth it to own his land outright, and now he was giving it all away. "The deed appears legitimate," the auctioneer announced reluctantly. "I hear any counterbids to Mr. Yi? Blackridge's offer of his entire estate?" Ravencroft's face had gone purple with rage. 1,500 cash. "I don't have 1,500 in cash," Kieran admitted, his heart sinking. "But my ranch is worth twice that. Easy." "Cash on the barrel," Grimwald sneered, sensing victory. "That's how real business is done, boy. Not with promises and property. Assessments." Judge Thornfield stroked his beard thoughtfully. "In matters of debt settlement, the law allows for payment in equivalent value, not just currency. However, the property would need to be independently appraised. There's no time for that." Kieran interrupted desperately. "By the time appraisers arrive, she'll be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice what these monsters would do to Celeste once they got her alone. 1,600? Ravencroft shouted triumphantly. 17. Grimwald countered, determined not to be outdone by his rival. Celeste closed her eyes in despair as the bidding spiraled beyond anything Kieran could match in cash. Her father, Jasper Nightingale, stood shamefaced at the edge of the crowd, too, cowardly to meet his daughter's eyes after gambling away her freedom at Grimwald's rigged poker games. But Kieran wasn't finished. "I'll work the mines," he called out desperately. "For Ravencroft, 10 years of labor to make up the difference? Ha!" Ravencroft laughed harshly. "I don't need workers. I need slaves. I prefer my slaves to come with softer hands and prettier faces." The crude reference to Celeste sent fury coursing through Kieran's veins. Before he could think, he was moving, his fist connecting with Ravencroft's jaw in a blow that sent the mine owner crashing into a nearby wagon. "You bastard," Kieran snarled, standing over the fallen man. "Talk about her like that again, and you'll what?" Grimwald's voice cut through his rage. "You'll fight every man here? You've already lost, boy. Accept it with grace." Sheriff Holbrook pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his gun, but that's enough. "Kieran, back away before I have to arrest you for assault." 1,800. Ravencroft wheezed from the ground, blood trickling from his split lip. "And I want that hothead thrown in jail for good measure." Kieran felt the walls closing in around him. His desperate gambit had failed. His money was worthless against their combined wealth. And now he'd made enemies of the two most powerful men in Millbrook. But then a new voice cut through the chaos clear, strong and utterly unexpected. $2,500, cash on the barrelhead. Every eye turned toward the source of the bid. A woman in traveling clothes standing beside an elegant carriage, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her sharp blue eyes taking in the scene with obvious disgust. "Who the hell are you?" Grimwald demanded. "Penelope Sinclair," the woman replied coldly. "And I'm here to put an end to this disgusting spectacle." Kieran's mind raced. He'd heard that name before. Sinclair. One of the wealthiest families in the territory, owners of silver mines and railroad stocks worth millions. But why would such a woman care about a blacksmith's daughter in a backwater town? "Ma'am," the auctioneer stammered, "I don't understand. Are you bidding for?" "I'm bidding to free that girl and shut down this human auction permanently," Penelope Sinclair announced. "Now, do you gentlemen wish to counter my offer, or shall we proceed with the business at hand?" The crowd fell silent, even Ravencroft's. And Grimwald's combined resources couldn't match that kind of money, and they knew it. Going once? The auctioneer said weakly. Going twice? Sold to Miss Sinclair for $2,500, as the crowd began to disperse in disappointment. Kieran stood frozen in disbelief. Celeste was free, but now she belonged to a complete stranger instead of him, Penelope. Sinclair's sharp heels clicked against the wooden platform as she approached Celeste, producing a pearl-handled knife that sliced through the ropes with surgical precision. Their child. You're safe now. Celeste rubbed her freed wrists, emerald eyes wide with confusion and lingering fear. I don't understand. Who are you? Why did you all will be explained in due time, Penelope replied, her voice softening slightly as she draped a traveling cloak around Celeste's shoulders. But first, we need to get you away from this den of vipers. Kieran stepped forward, his heart hammering with desperate hope. Miss Sinclair, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. But you're wondering what happens to the girl now, Penelope finished, her penetrating gaze studying his face. Tell me, young man, would you have truly given up everything? For her, your ranch, your livelihood, your future? Without hesitation, Kieran answered immediately. She means more to me than all of it combined. And you, child? Penelope turned to Celeste. How do you feel about this young fool who was ready to bankrupt himself for your freedom? Celeste's cheeks flushed pink, but her voice was steady. Love him more than life itself. But I won't let him destroy his dreams for my sake. A small smile played at the corners of Penelope's mouth. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. She gestured toward her carriage. Both of you, come with me. We have much to discuss, and these streets have ears. As they climbed into the luxurious carriage, Kieran couldn't help but notice the fine leather seats and silver appointments. This woman had wealth beyond his imagination. But more importantly, she'd used it to save the woman he loved. Now then, Penelope said, once they were settled. Let me properly introduce myself. I am Penelope Sinclair, and Celeste is my granddaughter. The words hit like thunderbolts. Celeste gasped, her hand flying to her throat. That's impossible. My mother died when I was born, and my father said her family disowned her for marrying. Beneath their station, your father told you the truth about the disowning, Penelope interrupted grimly. My late husband, Cornelius Sinclair, was a proud, stubborn man who couldn't bear the thought of his daughter marrying a simple blacksmith. When Helena defied him and eloped with Jasper Nightingale, Cornelius declared her dead to us. Tears welled. In Celeste's eyes? Then why now? Why save me after all these years? Penelope's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing the pain beneath. Because I've spent 20 years regretting my cowardice. I should have stood up to Cornelius, should have reached out to Helena before consumption took her. Now I failed my daughter, but I won't fail my granddaughter. The carriage rolled through Millbrook's dusty streets toward the edge of town. Passing the ramshackle cabin where Celeste had grown up in poverty while her wealthy grandmother lived in ignorance, just 200 miles away. I've been searching for you since Cornelius died last year, Penelope continued. Imagine my shock when I arrived in town today to learn you were being sold like livestock to pay your father's debts. Kieran found his voice at last. What happens? Now, I mean, Celeste is free, but he couldn't bring himself to voice his deepest fear that this reunion meant losing her. Forever to a world of wealth and privilege he could never enter. Now, Penelope said firmly, we right some wrongs. First, your father's debts will be paid in full. Second, Celeste will take her rightful place as my heir. And third, she paused, studying Kieran with calculating eyes. We'll see what kind of man you really are. The carriage pulled up beside a modest hotel on the outskirts of town. As they disembarked, Penelope handed a thick envelope to Kieran. Inside, you'll find the deed to your ranch which I purchased from the auction house. For the full appraised value, along with enough money to restock your herd and make improvements. Kieran stared at the envelope like it might bite him. I can't accept this. It's charity, and I won't. It's not charity, Penelope cut him off sharply. It's a test. You were willing to sacrifice everything for love. Now I want to see if you're man enough to build something worthy of my granddaughter. Grandmother Celeste interjected, her voice trembling with emotion. You don't understand, Kieran and I. We've never, even that is, we haven't what? Declared your feelings? Courted properly? Penelope's laugh was surprisingly warm. Child, I saw the way you looked at each other in that square. Some bonds transcend social conventions. She turned back to Kieran, her expression growing serious. I'm offering you a chance, young man. It takes 6 months to prove you can build a successful ranch, demonstrate you're worthy of providing for my granddaughter. If you succeed, you'll have my blessing to court her properly. If you fail, I won't fail, Kieran said quietly, his steel-gray eyes blazing with determination. Not when the stakes are this high. Celeste reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against his hand. Kieran, you don't have to do this. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. He turned her hand over in his, marveling at the softness of her palm against his work-roughened skin. Yes, I do. Not for her. He nodded toward Penelope. But for you. You deserve a man who can stand on his own, who can provide for you without relying on family charity. 6 months, Penelope repeated, and Celeste will be staying with me during that time, learning about her heritage and receiving the education befitting a Sinclair heiress. The words were like a knife to Kieran's heart, but he understood the wisdom behind them. He was going to win Celeste's hand. He needed to prove himself worthy of a woman who was apparently one of the richest heiresses in the territory. 3 months into his trial period, Kieran stood surveying the transformed Blackridge Ranch as the autumn sun painted the hills gold and crimson. The money from Penelope Sinclair had allowed him to purchase prime breeding stock, repair his fences, and even hire 2 ranch hands to help with the expanded operation. What had once been a struggling homestead was becoming a prosperous cattle operation. But success felt hollow without Celeste. He'd received only 3 letters from her in all that time, polite, formal notes that spoke of her studies in literature and music, her lessons in deportment and French, her gradual integration into Denver's high society under her grandmother's tutelage. Each letter felt more distant than the last, as if the blacksmith's daughter he'd fallen in love with was being slowly erased and replaced by someone else entirely. Boss called out Miguel Santos, one of his new hands. Riders coming up the valley trail? Kieran squinted into the afternoon sun and felt his heart skip. The lead rider was unmistakably female, sitting her horse with the elegant posture of someone who'd been taught proper equestrian skills. Behind her rode Penelope Sinclair and 2 men in city clothes lawyers. By their appearance, as they drew closer, Kieran's breath caught in his throat. Celeste was still beautiful than ever, in fact, but everything else about her had changed. Her wild auburn curls were tamed into an elegant coiffure. Her simple cotton dresses replaced by a riding habit of emerald velvet that probably cost more than his ranch hands made in a year. Even the way she carried herself was different. Higher, shoulders straighter, radiating the quiet confidence of someone born to wealth and privilege. Miss Sinclair, he said formally, as she dismounted, uncertain whether the intimacy they'd once shared was still welcome. This is an unexpected pleasure, Mr. Blackridge, she replied with equal formality. Though her emerald eyes held depths of emotion her voice didn't betray. Grandmother insisted on inspecting your progress personally. Penelope approached with her characteristic briskness, her sharp gaze taking in every detail of the ranch's improvements. Impressive work, young man. You've exceeded my expectations. Thank you, ma'am. Kieran felt awkward under her scrutiny, suddenly conscious of his dusty clothes and wind-burned hands. Next to Celeste's polished elegance, he felt like exactly what he was, a working rancher who belonged to a different world entirely. Mr. Blackridge, one of the lawyers, spoke up. We're here to discuss the terms of the contract, Miss Sinclair. Established. Based on our assessment, you've not only met the requirements, but surpassed them significantly. The question now, Penelope interjected, is what you intend to do about my granddaughter. Kieran's gaze found Celeste's face, searching for some sign of the woman who'd once looked at him with desperate hope from an auction platform. That depends on what she wants. She's not the same person she was 3 months ago. Neither are you, Celeste said quietly, speaking directly to him for the first time. You've built something remarkable here, Kieran, something that's entirely your own achievement. It doesn't mean anything without someone to share it with, he replied. Honestly. But I understand if you've outgrown ... This outgrown me. Pain flashed across Celeste's features. Is that what you think? Is that I've forgotten where I came from? Forgotten what you were willing to sacrifice for me? Before he could answer, she turned to her grandmother. I need to speak with Kieran privately, please. Penelope nodded approvingly. Take all the time you need, child. We'll be inspecting the cattle. Once they were alone, Celeste's careful composure cracked. Do you have any idea how hard these 3 months have been? Learning to be someone I'm not, pretending to care about things that don't matter, all while missing you so desperately I could barely breathe. Then why did the letters sound so... Kieran struggled for words. So distant? Because grandmother reads everything I write before it's sent, Celeste admitted. She's been testing me, making sure I don't revert to common behavior as she puts it, but Kieran, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. Relief flooded through him like a dam bursting. I thought I'd lost you to that world of wealth and privilege. Thought you'd realized you deserved better than a dirt poor. Rancha, you're not dirt poor anymore, she pointed out with a slight smile. And even if you were, it wouldn't matter. I don't want a life of empty luxury in drawing rooms and ballrooms. I want a life with you, building something real together. He reached for her then, his calloused hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. Are you sure? 'Cause if we do this, there's no going back. Your grandmother might cut you off entirely. Actually, came Penelope's voice from behind them. I won't. They turned to find her approaching with an expression of satisfaction. Did you really think I couldn't hear every word from 50 yards away? I've been testing both of you, him to see if he could build a life worthy of you, and you to see if wealth would corrupt your heart. Celeste stared at her grandmother in amazement. This was all planned? Not planned exactly, but hoped for, Penelope admitted. You see, child? I married for love once too. Your grandfather wasn't wealthy when I met him. He was a prospector with more dreams than sense. But he loved me enough to work himself nearly to death, proving he could provide for me. And I loved him enough to risk my family's disapproval. Smiled sadly. Unfortunately, success changed Cornelius. He became so focused on building an empire that he forgot what truly mattered. I won't let that happen to you. As winter settled over the Blackridge Ranch, Kieran and Celeste's courtship bloomed like wildflowers in spring rain. Penelope had purchased a small cottage in Millbrook, allowing her to oversee their relationship, while giving the young couple space to rediscover each other outside the constraints of formal society. Every evening after the ranch work was done, Kieran would ride into town to call on Celeste properly, bringing small gifts he'd crafted himself, a carved wooden locket, a bouquet of winter berries, a poem written in his careful hand. She would play piano for him in Penelope's rented parlor, her voice soaring through ballads that made his heart ache with longing, but it was during their chaperoned walks through Millbrook's quiet streets that they truly fell in love all over again. The desperate attraction born of crisis had matured into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the unshakable knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. I have something to confess, Celeste said one snowy December evening as they paused beneath a street lamp, her breath forming silver clouds in the frigid air. Those lessons grandmother insisted upon, the French and deportment and music, I hated every minute of them. Kieran chuckled, adjusting the woolen shawl around her shoulders. I could tell from your letters, or rather from what your letters didn't say. But I did learn one thing that made it all worthwhile, she continued, her emerald eyes sparkling with mischief. I learned that I never want to be anyone other than exactly who I am, Celeste Nightingale, daughter of a blacksmith, granddaughter of a silver baron, and hopefully someday, wife to the finest rancher in Colorado Territory. His heart stopped. Celeste... I'm not proposing to you, she laughed, though her cheeks were pink with more than cold. That's your job. I'm simply making my intentions clear. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Shouts and breaking glass suggested a brawl was underway, uncommon in Millbrook on a Saturday night. But something about the angry voices made Kieran tense with alarm. That's him, someone roared. That's the bastard who stole our jobs. Through the saloon's swinging doors stumbled Miguel Santos, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. Behind him came a mob of angry men led by Tobias Ravencroft, the mine owner who'd never forgiven Kieran for humiliating him at the auction. "There's nowhere to run, Santos," Ravencroft snarled. "You and your friend think you can come here and take work from honest Americans?" Kieran saw red. Miguel was a good man who'd lost his ranch in Texas to a drought and come north seeking honest work. The fact that he spoke with an accent didn't make him less deserving of employment. But Ravencroft had been poisoning minds against him for weeks. "Stay here," Kieran ordered Celeste, already moving toward the confrontation. "Like hell," she shot back, hiking up her skirts to match his pace. "That's our friend they're threatening." The mob had cornered Miguel against the general store, their faces ugly with drink and manufactured hatred. Ravencroft held a broken bottle, clearly intent on doing serious harm. "That's enough." Kieran's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Crack. Miguel works for me, and any man who touches him answers to me." Well, Ravencroft sneered, turning to face him. "If it isn't the ranch boy who thinks he's better than his betters, come to defend your pet Mexican?" "I've come to defend my friend," Kieran replied coldly, his hands hanging loose at his sides in the deceptively casual stance of a man who knew how to fight. "If you don't like it, we can settle this like men, instead of cowards who need a mob for courage." The crowd's bloodlust shifted focus from Miguel to Kieran, sensing the promise of better entertainment. But before violence could erupt, Penelope Sinclair's voice rang out across the street. "Tobias Ravencroft, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The mine owner's bravado wilted slightly as he recognized one of the territory's wealthiest women. "Miss Sinclair, this doesn't concern you." "Any attempt to harm my granddaughter's intended, and his employees concerns me greatly," Penelope replied with Arctic calm, "especially when it's motivated by the wounded pride of a man who can't accept losing gracefully." "Intended?" Several voices echoed, and Kieran realized Penelope had just publicly announced their engagement before he'd even proposed. Celeste squeezed his arm, her eyes dancing with suppressed laughter. "I believe grandmother just forced your hand, my love." "I was planning to ask properly," he murmured, "with a ring and everything. Ask me now," she whispered urgently as the crowd's attention focused on the confrontation between Penelope and Ravencroft. "Right here, right now, in front of everyone." His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't how he'd imagined proposing in the middle of a street fight, without a ring, with half the town watching, looking into Celeste's emerald eyes. He realized it was perfect. Their love had been born in crisis and forged in adversity. Why should their engagement be any different? Dropping to one knee right there in the snowy street, Kieran took her gloved hand in his. "Celeste Nightingale, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she cried, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, the mob's ugly mood broken by the romance of the moment. Even some of Ravencroft's supporters found themselves clapping, caught up in the emotion despite themselves. Ravencroft, however, was not so easily swayed. "This changes nothing," he snarled. "Mark my words, Blackridge, I'll see you ruined before I let you prosper in my territory." But his threat fell flat. The moment belonged to love, not hatred, and the gathered townspeople were already dispersing to spread word of the engagement throughout Millbrook, the wedding of Kieran. Blackridge and Celeste Nightingale Sinclair was set for the first Saturday in May, giving the couple 6 months to plan what had become the social event of the decade. Penelope spared no expense, importing flowers from California, musicians from San Francisco, and enough champagne to float a riverboat. But as spring arrived and the wedding drew near, shadows gathered around their happiness. Tobias Ravencroft's threats had proved more than empty bluster. Strange accidents plagued the Blackridge Ranch fences cut in the night. Cattle found poisoned in distant pastures, equipment sabotaged in ways that could have killed someone. Miguel Santos had been beaten so severely during one random attack in town that he'd spent 2 weeks bedridden. "We can't prove it's Ravencroft," Sheriff Holbrook admitted when Kieran confronted him about the escalating violence. "No witnesses. No evidence linking him directly to any of it." "Then what good are you?" Kieran snapped, his patience worn thin by months of harassment. "I'm doing what I can," Holbrook replied defensively. "But Ravencroft has half the town council in his pocket. Without proof, he's going to get someone killed. Celeste interrupted, her emerald eyes blazing with fury. How much proof do you need? That night, as Kieran walked her home from another tense meeting with the ineffectual sheriff, they were jumped by 3 masked men armed with clubs and knives. The attack was swift and brutal, clearly intended to cripple or kill rather than merely intimidate. Kieran fought with desperate fury, his fists and boots finding their marks even as knife blades slashed at his arms and shoulders. But he was outnumbered and taking serious damage when Celeste proved she was still the blacksmith's daughter beneath her lady's finery. Grabbing a fallen tree branch, she waded into the melee with a war cry that would have made her Viking ancestors proud. Her first swing cracked across the lead attacker's skull, dropping him like a stone. Her second shattered another man's wrist, sending his knife spinning away into the darkness. Run! The third attacker gasped, helping his injured companions limp away into the night. The bitch fights like a wildcat, Kieran staggered against a fence post, blood seeping through his torn shirt. Remind me never to make you angry, he managed, his voice tight with pain. Are you hurt badly? Celeste demanded, her hands fluttering over his wounds with tender concern. I'll live. But this has to stop, Celeste. Ravencroft's not going to quit until one of us is dead. She helped him back toward town, her mind racing with possibilities. Then we need to make sure he stops voluntarily. How do you propose we do? Leave that to me, she said with a smile that would have chilled Ravencroft's blood if he could have seen it. I learned more than French and deportment during my time with grandmother. The next morning, Tobias Ravencroft received an unexpected visitor at his mine office. Celeste Sinclair swept into the room like an avenging angel, her traveling dress immaculate, her manner that of a woman born to command. Miss Sinclair, Ravencroft stammered, clearly caught off guard. What brings you to my humble establishment? I think you know exactly why I'm here, Tobias, she replied coolly, settling into a chair without being invited. The question is whether you're intelligent enough to listen to reason. I'm afraid I don't understand the attacks on my fiancé and his ranch. Celeste cut him off sharply. They stop now, or you'll discover just how ruthless the Sinclair family can be when our interests are threatened. Ravencroft's mask of confusion slipped slightly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Just like you had no idea your 3 best miners would have bandaged heads and broken bones this morning. It's just like you have no idea that grandmother has been quietly buying up your debts from banks across the territory. Went pale. That's impossible. My finances are precarious at best, Celeste finished. Did you really think we wouldn't investigate before allowing me to live in the same town as a known murderer of women? She leaned forward, her emerald eyes glittering with dangerous intelligence. Here's what's going to happen, Tobias. The harassment stops immediately. You're going to publicly apologize to Kieran and his ranch hands. And you're going to attend our wedding with a smile and a generous gift. And if I refuse, Celeste's smile was razor sharp. Then grandmother calls in your debts, forecloses on your mines, and ruins you so completely that you'll be lucky to find work mucking stalls in Dodge City. And did I mention we have a witness who saw you paying those 3 miners to attack my fiancé? It was a bluff. They had no such witness, but Ravencroft's guilty conscience did the rest. You're just like your grandmother, he said with grudging respect. Ruthless when cornered. I prefer to think of it as protective of what I love, Celeste replied. Do we have an understanding? Ravencroft nodded slowly, recognizing defeat when he saw it. The attacks will stop. You have my word. Your word and your signature on this agreement, Celeste said, producing a document from her reticule, just to ensure we're both clear on the terms. As Ravencroft signed the paper with a trembling hand, he looked up at her with something approaching admiration. That young rancher has no idea what he's getting himself into, does he? Oh, I think he does, Celeste smiled. After all, he was willing to give up everything just to set me free. A man like that isn't easily intimidated by a strong woman. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with Colorado's majestic mountains providing a backdrop that no cathedral could match. The ceremony was held in the valley between Kieran's ranch and the town, with wooden benches arranged in neat rows facing an altar decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. As Kieran stood waiting in his finest black suit, his hands trembling slightly. With nervous excitement, he marveled at how far they'd both come from that desperate day at the auction platform. The struggling rancher who'd been willing to lose everything had built something worth keeping. The frightened girl marked for sale had found the strength to stand up to men like Ravencroft and win. The music began, not a grand organ, but a simple fiddle and guitar played by local musicians, and Celeste appeared at the far end of the flower-strewn aisle. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, the ivory silk catching the morning sunlight like captured starfire. But it was her radiant smile that truly took Kieran's breath away. Penelope Sinclair walked beside her granddaughter, having insisted on giving the bride away since Jasper Nightingale had left town in shame after the auction incident. The older woman's eyes glistened with tears as she placed Celeste's hand in Kieran's. "Take care of each other," she whispered to both of them. "Love like yours is rarer than silver and more precious than gold." Judge Thornfield, who'd overseen their courtship from the beginning, performed the ceremony with warmth and dignity. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, Tobias Ravencroft actually stood, but only to raise his champagne glass in a grudging toast, fulfilling his promise to attend with apparent good grace. "I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge," Thornfield declared. "Kieran, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise for all the years to come. When they broke apart, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause that echoed off the surrounding hills. The celebration lasted until well past midnight, with dancing, feasting, and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. Miguel Santos, his injuries healed and his job secure thanks to Celeste's intervention with Ravencroft, gave a speech in both Spanish and English that had half the crowd in tears. "Boss," he said, raising his glass toward Kieran and Celeste, "you save my life, give me work, treat me like family. Now you find woman who fights like warrior for people she loves. You're both blessed by God and lucky beyond measure." As the evening wound down and guests began departing for home, Kieran and Celeste found themselves alone on the porch of their ranch house, the home they would now share as husband and wife. The house Kieran had built with his own hands furnished, with pieces crafted in quiet evenings, made ready for the woman who'd transformed his life simply by believing he was worthy of sacrifice. "Any regrets?" Celeste asked, settling into his arms as they watched the last carriages disappear down the valley road. "Only one," Kieran admitted, his lips brushing against her hair. She pulled back to look at him in concern. "What?" "I regret that it took an auction platform and a corrupt judge to bring us together. We wasted too many years loving each other. From afar, when we could have been building this life together all along." Celeste's laughter was like music in the mountain air. "Oh, my darling fool, don't you see? Everything that happened, the auction, grandmother's test, even Ravencroft's attacks, it all led us here. To this moment, to this life, to the absolute certainty that we can weather any storm as long as we face it together." She was right, Kieran realized. Their love story could have been simpler: rancher courting a blacksmith's daughter, a quiet wedding, a peaceful life. But it wouldn't have been theirs. They'd been forged in crisis, tested by adversity, and proven worthy of the extraordinary. Happiness they'd found in each other's arms. "So what happens now, Mrs. Blackridge?" he asked, savoring the sound of her new name. "Now we build our empire." She replied with the confident smile of a woman who'd learned she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. "We expand the ranch, raise children who know their own worth, and show the world that love doesn't make you weak kid, makes you invincible." 20 years later, as they stood on the same porch watching their 5 children play in the yard while their cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, Kieran would remember those words and know they'd been prophetic. The Blackridge Ranch had become one of the most successful in the territory. Their children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, had inherited their parents' strength, intelligence, and unwavering moral compass. But most importantly, their love had only grown deeper with time. The desperate attraction born of crisis had matured into a partnership, so strong it had become legendary throughout Colorado territory. People spoke of Kieran Blackridge, who'd given up everything to save the woman he loved; Celeste Sinclair Blackridge, who'd faced down corrupt judges and violent mine owners; to protect her family. Their story was told around campfires and in saloons, inspiring other couples to believe that true love could conquer any obstacle. But Kieran and Celeste knew the real secret of their success. They'd never stopped fighting for each other, never stopped choosing love over fear, never stopped believing that together they were stronger than anything the world could throw at them. The rancher had loved the girl held at auction, and he'd sold everything to get her back. But in saving her, she'd saved him right back. And together they'd built something that would last for generations, a love story worthy of the wild, magnificent country that had brought them together.